Welcome, everyone. Today, my guest is Juliet Grabowski. Is that how you say your last name? I didn't even
Yes.
ask. Okay, good. And and rather than me introduce her, I'm gonna have her introduce herself and where you're currently at, Juliet, and then a little bit about like how you got drawn into this world of finance.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Juliet Grabowski. I'm a managing director and partner at the Boston Consulting Group. I currently lead at BCG several areas of our finance function, including most notably, I'm leading our finance transformation, inclusive of our SAP implementation, our finance excellence capability, and our finance application portfolio. And I came into this role from having been in the consulting side, where I spent my time for several years doing finance transformation work with our clients. So worked in many different industries and all different types of transformations from, CFOs that were looking to drive more operating efficiency to those who are looking to drive more effectiveness in their finance function, to those rethinking talent and skills within finance, to those thinking about, how should the finance function evolve given their evolving business needs. And so it's been really exciting to take those learnings from other companies and point them at ourselves and ensure that we're eating our own dog food in terms of our own transformation. And then, how I got into this a little bit random, helping over time at BCG, helping clients on all sorts of problems. I was really drawn to this type of work of the finance function specifically. And I would say finance it's a very interesting place to be because you need so many different skills, you need so many different capabilities, from like very technical finance accounting capabilities to data and analytics skills to relationship skills to change management skills. And so for me, it's been really exciting to take part in work to help finance leaders to drive their business depending on their own strategy and their own business outcomes that they're looking to drive.
Yeah, I love that. So when you say SAP implementation, like you said, you're leading the charge
Yep.
for that at BCG right now.
Yeah, that's right. And we know from experience, having worked with many different clients, that these sorts of transformations are really, really hard. Any big systems implementation is really, really difficult, but ERP transformations in general, of which SAP is a type of ERP, tend to be particularly tricky. It's really getting into the guts of the financial systems. You have to get everything right, and there's so much interconnectivity. For us, it was time to move to a new platform. We were aging out of our old technology, and also, frankly, our business has been continuing to evolve as we support clients in different ways, move into more software offerings, into larger, more complex transformations. We got to the point where we really needed technology that would grow with our business. And so for us, this move has not just been like a technical move or a kind of hidden systems transformation. In many ways, it's very strategic in helping us to grow our business in the ways that we want to grow it.
Yeah, so I love that because you've got the 30,000 foot view, having helped multiple industries and verticals, do these types of projects. You've now also got like the really dialed in, like I can't see the forest from the trees kind of view. And so you got this interesting mix of experience. And one of the things you and I had talked about was what the fact that you're a woman, and in finance tends to be really male dominated. And that's not a political statement, that's just a fact, right?
Yep.
And maybe one of the reasons is a lack of recognition that it brings all of those elements to the table. What you were talking about, it's not just crunching numbers. So, two-part question. One, can you go into a little bit of those different elements that make up finance? And two, how do women bring a different perspective? How can they fit into this world that maybe they don't see themselves in?
Yeah. So first, let me start with to your point about different types of finance. Finance is funny. We call it one thing, we call it finance, but it's really so many different sub-functions and so many different capabilities that are needed within a large finance organization, right? So For example, you need very technical accountants who understand accounting rules and can ensure that we're doing the right things in the books, right? And very technical expertise there is critical. Um, you also need people on a related but different end of the spectrum who are thinking about the big picture, who are thinking about strategy, like your classic FP&A folks, who are focused not just like on reporting and making sure the numbers got right, but more importantly, being forward looking, thinking about what's around the corner, where do you want to head as a business, what are the key decisions that you need to make, what's the data that you need to make those decisions. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff, other stuff in there too, right? Like, you think about tax professionals, or you think about those that are doing, building analytics systems within a finance function, so many different skills and capabilities. One of the things that we've seen with our clients, and is true for us as well, is that, as you move from a world where so much of finance is focused on getting the numbers right, which is absolutely important, right, to more and more automating that type of work, the rules-based work. And so you spend less time on the rules-based work, on collecting data, normalizing data, joining data, reporting data, right? And move more into the forward looking, like what is our strategy? What do we need to do next? It's a different set of skills and capabilities that are required. And so what's needed in that, more and more what's needed in that type of world, in the forward looking world, are things like relationship skills, navigating through ambiguity, bringing stakeholders, diverse perspectives to the table to work through really nutty problems. And so it requires, again, like a slightly different skill set. Now, many different people, of course, can possess those types of skills, but I think that disproportionately, women, and, again, I'm not making comments about individuals, but disproportionately, women bring a different set of skills, maybe, particularly in the culture that I've grown up in, disproportionately leaning into empathy and listening, as an example, right? Or leaning into storytelling, or leaning into relationship skills. And those become strategically advantageous to have in your team when you're navigating through complexity, navigating through ambiguity, and navigating through change. And so I think this applies to, women. It applies, I'll be clear, to anyone, who comes from a different perspective, diverse perspectives, of which, women in this organization, in the finance organization, can be one, can become strategically important in helping an organization navigate through change in our changing times.
Yeah. Can you give me, like, can you go really granular and maybe, again, from that 30,000 foot view, you've seen, a time where those skills have been lacking and how it slows down, say, an implementation or the process of a finance transformation versus when those skills are present. What are the differences that you've seen?
Yeah, yeah. And I can even think about some of my own, our experiences in navigating
Yes.
through the SAP implementation, right? Because one thing about an ERP implementation, the level of complexity is extraordinary and no one knows everything. Okay, right? So if you take an example of, let's say that we're going to customize this solution, something, you're going to implement something that changes, how you think about revenue internally. And that's one that we think about because there's a way that we report it externally, and then there's a way that we report it internally, as most companies do, that reflect how we think about the business. If you're marching ahead without thinking about bringing people along the journey, it is so easy to make a decision that has all these downstream implications. It can have an implication for this team that's in a recently acquired business unit. It could have an implication for that team, which cuts their reporting a different way. If you don't think about it, right, and bring people along the journey, there can be all these downstream implications that then cause work and churn and consternation for others, right? But if I think about something that I'm proud of on my team that oftentimes happens is a few things. Is first of all, just taking a pause and saying, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What did I get wrong? Like bringing different people to the table to challenge, and that taking the moment to challenge in some ways it can be a little emotionally uncomfortable, but it's so smart to do as a program because then you make sure that you really get to the right solution. So what do you need to do in those moments? You need to be like emotionally aware about how it feels. You need to have stakeholder relationships, know how to bring them to the table. You need to know how to not just take space in a meeting, but make space for other people to
Mhm.
contribute their ideas. And again, many of these are skills where, again, not commenting on individuals, but disproportionately, women have been socialized for these sorts of skills. They become really important. And then I would say, with all of these things, with anything that has change, putting yourself in the shoes of a stakeholder who's going to experience and bringing them along the journey, that kind of empathy for who are the end users, who are the people in the business, how is this going to feel for the people in finance who are using the tool? How is this going to feel for the business user who's going to be looking at the data? How is it going to feel when they see something different? What is that going to mean for them? That kind of empathy becomes
Right.
really, really important in driving a change program, not only so you make the right decisions up front, but so that you manage the change longer term.
Right. So that because that's the thing about so many financial transformations is they don't stick, right? You can spend millions of dollars. And I experience not experienced this, but I spoke with someone maybe a little over a year ago and said that they had implemented one system and I mean a big system, probably cost at least a half a million or more, and they were scrapping the whole thing and moving to a different one. And that was not a system problem. That was a change management problem because he said nobody liked it.
Unfortunately, that's common, right? And in big transformations, like a few things tend to happen. One is they tend to go way over budget and way over schedule is unfortunately common, is the fact pattern we see is point one. And then point two is disproportionately they don't deliver the value that was anticipated. And this is true for ERP transformations in finance, but also for other big
Sure.
transformations. And I think your point about making it stick is a really interesting one because, at the end of the day, why do we change, right? Like why would we go through the pain of a big systems implementation? Why would we go through the pain of any sort of transformation? It's because we believe that we're going to get value out of it on the other side. For us, we've defined that value in essentially four categories. One is operating efficiency. Like, does it help us to go, faster, do things cheaper? Two is around effectiveness as a finance function. Do we get better data that helps us to make better decisions for our leaders? Three is around risk reduction. Do we reduce our operating risk, through better controls, that kind of thing? And then four is through employee experience, particularly for our finance professionals. Do they like working here and like working, in our organization? Do they have a good experience and a good employee value proposition? And so for us, we keep those four at the forefront, right? And even we kind of have this, for us, this placemat where we look at all the different parts of the bodies of work that we're implementing changes in, and we have this sort of color code. Red is worse, yellow is just as good, and green is better. And we're looking at where do we want to be and where are we today as we're implementing, and we use that almost as a guiding light. It's literally one page of where are we today and where are we going that really forces us to, okay, are we holding ourselves accountable for those outcomes? And if we're not, right, what do we need to do? Is it a technical thing, which to your point, like sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. I had a conversation with a team just this morning, and they were saying that they're not quite getting the value out of the tool. And as we uncovered it, it was less that we needed to change something technically and more we needed to help them to understand how to find what they needed in the tool
Right.
and get used to it, right? And so that always takes longer than we think. When someone operates in a tool for 20 years and you give them a new tool, it's not like turning a switch. You need to bring them on the journey in order to get the true value.
Yeah, absolutely. So on the one point, when you're doing big finance transformations, there's this space holding that you talked about. And that's a big part of change management. And again, like we're talking about now, making it stick. On the other hand, is there a place where, as a female leading a finance transformation or having a big voice, you can hold too much space and like let in too much, and to the point where it might derail it the other way, where it's like you're trying to do too much at once. And how do you learn? So in other words, like how do you find that balance, and how do you learn to hold your own voice in that right balance as a female in finance transformation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think if I were to take a step back, I would say, again, this is disproportionate. Not everyone is like this, but disproportionately, at least in my experience, and I think the data suggests this too, that women disproportionately feel imposter syndrome. I was
Mm,
reading about it the other day, and I was learning about how like imposter syndrome oftentimes is sort of triggered by feeling different or feeling other, right? And sometimes that can be because you're the only female in the room. Sometimes it can be for invisible differences because you come from a different background than everyone. And so I think first of all, for me, just reflecting on my own personal journey and points where I've felt imposter syndrome is first just recognizing it. Because it's kind of like once you recognize it, you can externalize it and say, okay, this is how I'm feeling. Now, can I play a role? Can I pretend, right? Can I pretend that I feel more confident, or can I pretend, you know what I mean? Or not to pretend to know something I don't know, but pretend, okay, what would happen if I thought of myself a certain way? How would I act differently in a meeting? So I think that's one for me. Two is, okay, where have I gotten strength from? Where I've gotten strength from is allowing myself to ask questions because I don't know the answer to everything. And this has been a real learning experience for me around how much everyone else knows. And so I do think that there is something about like confidently ask the questions, confidently challenge, allow yourself to be the person who asks the stupid question, because sometimes that's actually the smartest question that no one is asking.
yeah,
Allow that. But then also have the moment where you say, we need to make a decision. It is my role at a certain point to get to closure on a decision and recognize not everyone's going to be happy with that decision. But I will say, like, one thing that's helped me with that, in when the like people pleaser in me comes out is bringing people along the journey. If it's just on me to make a decision, that's a disaster, right? Versus here's my process by which we all jointly get to a decision, right? I learn from other people. We put the pros and cons on the calendar or on the table. We have a specific point at which we are going to make a decision. We debate it, we make that decision, and then we move on. So
yeah,
I do think there is something about using process to your advantage. But at the end of the day, like when it comes to, you've got to make space, but you can't make everyone happy. And if you
yeah,
try to, you end up making no one happy.
right. That's a good distinction. Um, Kind of switching gears, what do you wish, there's a lot of talk about digital finance, right? And that's the direction that a lot of these transformations are going from, like on-prem type systems to cloud-based systems,
Yep.
or, Excel-based systems to, AI and ML type systems and things like that.
Yep.
And so at this point, what do you wish more women knew about the digital side of finance?
Um, what do I wish more women knew about the digital side of finance? Well, I would say this is true for anyone. I don't know if it's different for women than for men.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
maybe that's a starting point is uh no, people aren't born with the knowledge of these things. We're all learning really quickly. Take the more advanced stuff around like generative AI. Everyone's making it up as they go along. Everyone's making it up as they go along. And so take comfort in that. And this is a moment actually to experiment and be creative. And taking a risk, being able to take a risk is a strategic advantage because you will
Mm.
learn really, really quickly. I will say, like, men are good learners, but women are really, really good learners, right? Look around, listen, use your strengths around relation. Oh, and maybe this is actually something is lean into your strengths as women to advance in this space. So for example, like I made this point about everyone's making it up as they go along. There's so much innovation going on around you. Who in your network is bleeding edge? listen to them, go on LinkedIn, have conversations, source it from the crowd. Like that is a real advantage, is to use your social network and your listening skills,
Yeah.
to collect information, and then your relationship skills to share that back into the business. Um, but I think that beyond that, there are a lot of things that are also just gender neutral, which are like,
Yeah.
the path that people are taking in this space, like the future state is less of the going up the ladder and more of the career as the jungle gym, right? So doing horizontal moves, taking on new projects that are, again, like it's a horizontal capability, but you learn something new and you widen your skill set, and that ability to widen your skill set, like do a rotation in your business intelligence and analytics group, do a rotation here, like learn, engage in a project related to building new analytic tools, get to understand your underlying data infrastructure, ask all those questions, like taking the risk and learning more and navigating the social constructs of your organization helps you to learn more. It's like being, it's like a brain that is really smart is not one that has more brain cells. It has one that has more connected brain
More
cells.
pathways. Yeah,
Right, exactly. And
totally.
that tight lattice of like
Mhm.
relationships in an organization, that's what gives you knowledge advantage.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And and so you don't have to be, in that case, the smartest person in the room, right? In order to progress. Not even close.
Not even close. You have to be, what is it? I think it was the head of Microsoft. I mean, don't misquote me if I got it wrong, but we don't want the smartest organization. We want a learning organization, right? We
Right.
want to be curious. It's like, especially in a fast-moving world where no one knows everything, curiosity is what helps you to float to the top, because no one knows everything.
Yeah. So what do you think we can do to help um to help more women want to enter finance, to help more women progress in finance and be open to this, this jungle gym that is this changing world of finance that, like you said at the beginning, is shifting more from just pure numbers to forecasting, looking into the future, plugging in different drivers, seeing what what can happen. And I mean, it's really part of strategy now. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think a few things. One is sponsorship really matters a lot. And so I think there is something to having leaders within the finance function or in, adjacent areas in the business looking out for like the high potential women really matter. I mean, it's so small, but like as a senior leader to say to a woman, I believe in you. Like take 15 moments, say, I'm curious about your career and your interests and ambitions, and I believe in you. And what can I do to help you? Sometimes we think that like the mentorship has to be this really huge, high burden, but I think it is important for senior leaders just to take a few moments. I mean, in fact, I've been shocked at how much in my career I've said something to one person and it resonated, and they told me years later, hey, you said this thing to me and it made a difference. Or even,
Wow.
just to give a personal example, like maybe 15 years ago, I was talking with a manager at a company that I was working for, and I was saying, I'm not sure I want to get an MBA. And he said, I think you would do well, like, and I think you could get into a top school. And that one conversation led me to apply to several top schools, and I like got into one, and it changed the course of my career. That one
Wow.
comment from that one individual who expressed belief in me changed the course of my career. And so I do think that there is something for being conscious of like, who are the rock stars out there, inclusive of women, and taking the moment to mentor. And then I think there's all the other goodness around making sure that you have diverse slates and that kind of thing for hiring and
Yeah.
promotions. And I would say also, the research shows that implicit bias is a thing. We all have it. I have it. Everyone has it. Self-recognizing those moments of implicit bias, like, hey, I'm going to lift up this one other person because they look and act like me, take that moment, recognize it, and say, well, are there other people who maybe look like a different profile, or, who I might not necessarily lean into, but when I think about it, actually have some really interesting skills and capabilities, and taking the moment to lift that person up too.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, now this is a little bit off topic, but a lot this has come up with me, like with the recruiting background. Sometimes women who are on the cusp of, let's say, a promotion or something like that, um, don't want to move up because they're afraid that it will take more time. Is there a way, that that doesn't have to be possible, where women can maintain that balance that is really important to a lot of them, not to all of them, but to a lot of them, and still progress, in the traditional way, as in gaining more responsibility, higher pay, all those things. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah, and this is one that's come up in my own life too, for sure, that I felt, and I have two young children. I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I'm very committed to my home and family life. Not that that you have to necessarily have children for this
Sure.
to be important to you by any
Right.
means. But I'd say a few things. One is, it is important to recognize that what got you here won't get you there. Meaning, at a certain point in the organization, how you drive value changes as you go up the ladder. It's not that you do what you did before and do more of it, but it changes. So for example, when you're an individual contributor, your job is to do the work, right? But when you're a manager of individual contributors, your job is not to do the work, it is to enable other people to do the work, right? So first of all, I think there's a recognition that it's not just about like expansion and scope, but it is a shift in what you do day to day. Second of all, I'll share, I have a mentor within BCG, and he worked at a large consumer goods company, and he was at one point the center of or the head of all of their like global services, essentially, like their global and shared services. And when he was put into the role, he was told, and by the way, thousands of people in his organization, he was told, you're not going to be successful by working harder. There are of people in your organization, right? Like, you working a little harder is not going to make the difference. It's about directing the energy of other people, right? And I thought that was really, really interesting. And to me, how I interpret that is, as I move up and as I've taken more responsibility, my success factors, or the leading success factors, are not that I spend more hours, but that I'm directing other people and directing their energy in the right ways. And if
Yeah.
I do that, that should not only constrain or contain the work that I do, but it should contain the work that they do too, because it's helping them to focus on the things that are most impactful and the most valuable. So I think in summary, I would say, to your point about people who are worried about increased responsibility and what does it mean on the demands for them from a time perspective, recognize that a good leader shifts to different activities, not to more time spent.
Yeah, that's a really good realization. And I hope that that women listening can, and like you said, a lot of this is going to be gender neutral too, because, the hustle tends to be the dominant culture. And so, especially in management consulting, or, some of those other professions where you just think, okay, well, in order to progress, it's got to work more, and more.
Yeah.
And at some point, like, you can't work 24 hours in a day. And so there's got to be some shift to where you understand that it's not about more. It's about, I like the way you put it, directing energy.
Yeah. And I'd say, like, oftentimes we have our own internal narratives that lead to certain sets of behaviors. Even just to share an example for myself, when after I had my first child and I came back to work, I wasn't sure that it was going to be able to work for me, because to your point, like, management consulting can be particularly intense. And I was thinking, like, do I even come back at all? And I decided, well, why don't I come back part-time? So I came back 80%, because I thought, if I can make it work 80%, it'll work a lot better. And if I can't make it work, then, the job isn't for me. And, failure is learning, and I'll go and do something else. And so while I was doing 80%, what was interesting to me was like recognizing the narratives that unchecked would lead me back to explosive amounts of work. So for example, there was a moment where a client had emailed me that they were very dissatisfied with some analysis that my team had done, made me feel very insecure. And I thought, okay, well, what is the partner on the case? Like, what is he going to say? And at the moment in my head, I said, well, I'll just work harder. And then I thought, oh no, I can't have both, right? Like I can't then work harder and do the 80%. And I realized that part of how I was dealing with my insecurities was, well, I'll just be the hardest working person on the team. Maybe I'm not the smartest, but I'm the hardest working person on the team. And so like again, like it was a narrative that was leading to somewhat destructive behaviors. And I had to take a moment with myself to say, well, if the thing that makes me special is not that I'm the hardest working person on the team, because if I'm 80%, by definition, I am the least hardworking person on the team. What is it that makes me special and what is it that makes me drive value? How do I differentiate myself? And I had to really spend time and soak in that and lean into that. And I think that's important for all of us to recognize is what are our narratives that lead to self-destructive behaviors when it comes to how much time we spend with work and how do we repivot towards more healthy and constructive narratives and behaviors?
Yeah, that's big. Thank you for sharing that because that's like that really specific example I think a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
So is there anything that we haven't touched on um, that you feel is important for, let's just go ahead and say anyone in finance to hear right now, especially as things are feeling very unstable and they have for a really long time. Like I feel like we're at this place in history where it's like, oh, things are going to stabilize, things are going to stable out, things are going to stabilize, things are going to be, and they just really haven't. Since COVID, it's just been one wild ride. And you know what? It just may never stable out.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts, around that and around the finance function, with that lens?
So I'd say a few things. First of all, to your point, change is the new norm. Like we went from a world where like the question was kind of like, okay, we're going to do a 3-year transformation. When is the transformation done? To transforming is never done, right? There's too much instability in the world. Like I was actually chatting with one business leader just it was late last week and we're recording this during a point where there's a lot of volatility in the markets right now for a lot of reasons. And this person was saying to me, I just keep thinking like, well, will this be the year that's a normal year? And I realized like we're just not going to have a normal year business wise, right? And that impacts the finance function too, right? Change is the new norm, right? But it's also I would call it a bit of a crisitunity. It's an opportunity that comes out of crisis. And the opportunity is new learning, new ways of doing things, the opportunity to question every day, why am I doing this? Am I doing it because I always did it? Or is it because that's the thing that drives value? Actually, even just to give like one small example in our own organization, as we're going through this big transformation with SAP and our broader finance transformation, I mean, people are underwater with work. Everyone's working really hard. So we took a step back and we asked, what do we do day to day that maybe we don't need to do? And there's this one particular global report that takes our central accounting team 50 hours a week to get through. And they said, we actually don't think we need to do this report. It's duplicative with these other things. And we decided to kill it. In fact, the last month was the first month where we're not doing it anymore. We're just stopping, just stopping work,
Wow.
right? And it was
Yeah.
this change and the tumult that came from the change that forced us to take a bit more of a step back and say, why are we doing these sets of things? What happens if we just don't do them and focus more on the most value-adding activities? So that's a bit of advice that I would give. The other bit of advice that I would give, again, for all people, but maybe disproportionately for women, is raise your hand and take a risk. Disproportionately, I find men are more likely, and actually the research proves this out, they're more likely to raise their hand for a kind of ambiguous opportunity. Like I remember reading some statistic where something about, and I don't remember all the parameters of the study, but something about like for certain types of roles, men apply when they're 50% ready and women
Yeah.
apply when they're 90% ready, right? And I'm
Yes.
sure that those numbers are directionally right and specifically wrong, right? But what would happen if you raised your hand while you were 50% ready? You know, the downsides are actually pretty minimal. You know, if nothing else, you've signaled to other people that you have ambition and interest to try things that are new, and maybe that helps you with the next thing. So I would say raise your hand, take a risk. It's those that are willing to be creative and take risks and try new things that are going to be the real stars of tomorrow, because those are the people who are going to be able to navigate change, navigate ambiguity, and have new skills in this world that's
Yeah.
changing so quickly. So I guess that's the last piece of advice I would give is take a risk, raise your hand.
Yeah, that's huge. And I think too, um, women tend to be, they don't recognize maybe until they've heard someone say it out loud. They're really good with ambiguity. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, they are very good in situations where they don't know, all the puzzle pieces aren't there. And, can be extremely creative and resourceful when it comes to those types of quandaries.
Yeah. I hate to say, I don't want to sound biased, disproportionately again, like women who have children and are
Mhm.
navigating so many different things. Like I find sometimes those are the most effective folks on my team because they're not going to be dealing with baloney. They don't have time to deal with baloney. Like they're going to focus on the things that matter most. And that's what you need in moments of ambiguity is to kind of cut through the noise and say, and ask what really matters and get really,
Right.
really focused on the stuff that matters.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this has been absolutely terrific. So thank you for taking the time and for, just being real and giving us some real examples, from your own career and from your own current experience. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for the lovely conversation.